small group today. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do after you just note what the homework is for Thursday is go over with you the handout that I just gave you about these exploratory reflections, right? So essentially what these are short papers that you're going to be writing that you can then kind of build on for the two longer papers, right? So reflection 1 is going to give you a kind of starting point for working on the first longer paper that we're going to do around midterm, right? All right, so the first thing you're going to be doing is picking a text to write about, right? So I've given you a list here of which texts you can choose for each of the reflection papers. So anything from Plato to Amy Tan, who we're going to be reading, I believe, next week, is fair game for this one. And then what you're going to do, once you have chosen a text, is apply the reading methods we've been using in class, right? So you're going to find a single strand, binary, or anomaly that you want to examine. You're going to choose a single quote from your chosen text and copy to the top of the page that you think really exemplifies this particular pattern you've noticed. And then you are going to break down that quote, right, to pull out all of the implications. Now, I'm not expecting you to have like an argument or a thesis at the beginning of this, right? Because what this is supposed to be is what we call thesis-seeking writing. You are essentially writing to try to find an argument, right? To try to find a thesis. So you will have already isolated the particular pattern that you want to talk about. But what you are going to be trying to do is then build that pattern into an argument, right? So you're going to want to try to make the case for the meaning or the significance of that particular pattern. So keep that model that we've been using at the end of class in mind, right? This seems to be about X, could also be about Y, right? What you're looking for here is the Y. Any questions so far? Okay, formal requirements, right, are pretty much the same as they are for the homework assignments, right? So it's got to be 12-point Times New Roman font, double spaced, just because that is easier for my poor old eyes to read. 500 to 750 words, not including your chosen quote and your works cited page, right? Those do not count towards the total word count. And I want to see MLA-style citation with parenthetical notation and a works cited page. I've also put here the link to Purdue OWL's MLA citation page so that you know exactly what you're doing here, right? So you can go back and reference that for help with citation if you need it. So what I want you to do when you are citing is to treat each of the essays as single works in an anthology, right? So don't cite the whole book. What I want you to try to do is cite the single essay. So if you are writing about Aeschylus, for example, right? If you quote in the body of your paper, then what you're going to give me is the author name, and the page number, right? So Aeschylus 114. Normally it would be the author's last name, but Aeschylus only has one name. When you would be putting this in your works cited page, meanwhile, it would look more like this. Right. Aeschylus, the Eumenides, Reading the World, edited by Michael Austin, then the publisher, Norton, the dates, whatever the hell this is. The date is 2020. Hell of a year that was. And then finally the page numbers. So pages 111 to 120. Now, it's not going to be as big a deal for this assignment because you're only working with that one text and that single quote. But in general, in the humanities, the norm is to quote in your papers, right? In the social sciences, I know it's more common to summarize and paraphrase. But in the humanities, we generally want to see direct quotes. So in the work you guys are doing, I'm going to want to see you guys actually quoting things, right? Okay, so in terms of basic guidelines here, right? So one of the first things that you're going to want to do as you're analyzing your quote is find a specific interpretive context for it, right? So we've been doing that for each of the texts we've been looking at, whether it's a historical context, right? This is what was happening in the place and time where this was composed, right? Or a philosophical context, or the characteristics of a particular literary genre, like we're going to talk about today. Basically, any appropriate frame that helps you understand what the text is doing, right? I want you to try to stick with the same context through the whole paper. So if you choose a historical context, for example, stick with that. And be specific. Right, so if, for example, you choose a historical context, avoid vague phrases like back in the day. God, how I hate the phrase back in the day, right? Now, the reason I hate a phrase like back in the day is because it suggests that all of history is just this great big jumble of events that happened before you were born, right? And that when and where particular things happened don't matter. We know that's not how history actually works, right? So my point is, just be specific when you're talking about your contexts, right? The other thing you really want to do here is to pay close attention to word choice, right? So remember what we said about synonyms a few weeks ago, right? There's really no such thing as a true synonym. You cannot replace a word with another and adequately capture the meaning of that other word because of all of the emotional and symbolic resonances that particular words have, right? So what I want you to do is pay attention to these other particular shades of meaning while you're reading. Also, the thesis you come up with has to be arguable. Arguable means three things, right? It means 1, it is supported by evidence from the text. 2, it is an idea that would not be immediately obvious to anyone who read the text. And 3, it is a position with which another reader could conceivably disagree, right? So if you are coming up with something that would be hard for someone else to disagree with, that doesn't mean you've come up with a good argument, right? What it means is that you've come up with something that is too broad or too vague. If you come up with something strong and specific, it could be possible for another reader to come up with a different answer, right? And finally, remember that the overall purpose here is to help you come up with a thesis you can use as a starting point for a longer paper. So make sure that when you're picking a text, you choose one that you wouldn't mind spending a little more time and attention on, and try to locate a pattern that you think could sustain a 1,000 to 1,500 word argument. So any questions about any of this? Everybody gets what they have to do. Everybody understands. Okay, and I am willing to look at drafts as well if you want to show me something before you turn it in. Right? You've got a couple of weeks before this is due. The first of these reflections is due on Tuesday, the 2nd of March. So that's about 3 weeks from today, right? So you've got some time to think about this. You've got some time to consider. I would suggest trying to get started relatively early, right? Settle on a text fairly early and give yourself some time to work on this. All right, so if there are no questions about this, then let's talk about the excerpt from the Eumenides that I gave you. What did you think of this? How'd this go for you? The text of the excerpt starts on page 113. What'd you think?
I thought it was like just different from like other things we read before, or like you read in like different classes.
Okay, what was different about it? How was this different or strange?
Just like how it's set up to me, it kind of reminds me of how a poem is set up.
Okay, yeah, so it's written in verse, right? And all Greek plays were written in verse. They were written as poems, yes. Okay, so good. It's written in verse. What else is weird about this? What is actually going on here? What is the focus of this excerpt?
I can't say his name, but he's being tormented. That's what it says. It says he's being tormented by the Furies.
Uh-huh.
And they're charged with driving to madness those who commit terrible acts of violence.
Okay, so what I am gathering is that people maybe didn't do the reading or didn't do it all that closely.
I did it. I was just like I had trouble like understanding exactly what happened. So I was like read this and I had notes down.
Uh-huh. Okay, so yeah, so when we're talking about the larger play, Orestes, the character you're talking about, has a much bigger part in the larger play, right? But the excerpt that we're given here is just the end of the play.
Yeah.
And Orestes really only appears at the very beginning of this excerpt, and then he's out of the story. So let me explain what's going on in the story here to give you some context for that, right? So the Eumenides is the last of a set of 3 plays in a trilogy that Aeschylus wrote called the Oresteia. The other 2 are called Agamemnon and the Libation Bearers. Right, and then the Eumenides or the Furies is the last play. And what these are about is the aftermath of the Trojan War, specifically the fate of the family of the general Agamemnon. Do you guys know anything about the Trojan War? Is this familiar at all to you? No? Okay. So the Trojan War in Greek mythology is a decade-long conflict. A woman named Helen, who is the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta, is kidnapped by a prince by the name of Paris, who comes from a city in what's now Turkey. And he takes her back to his city, and Menelaus, who is Agamemnon's brother, and their allies gather an army, and they spend 10 years trying to destroy this city in order to take Helen back, right? At the end of the war, they come home successful, and Agamemnon, in the first play, is murdered by his wife, Helen's sister, Clytemnestra. Now, to provide some context for that, he's murdered because, one, she hates him because he sacrificed their daughter to get fair winds to take him to Troy. And also because he brings back with him a young Trojan princess as a concubine, and she's none too thrilled about that either. So the second play is about their children, their son Orestes and their daughter Electra, who are torn between two different duties, two different concepts of duty, right? On the one hand, they are bound to love, honor, and respect their mother. But they are also bound to avenge the death of their father. And much of the action in the second play concerns which of those two loves is the more important, which of those two duties is the more important, right? The duty to the father or the duty to the mother. And in the Eumenides, we have Orestes' trial. He has been, he decides that his real duty is to avenge his more important duty is to avenge his father. So he kills his mother, is pursued by the Furies for some time, and in the final play is tried and then acquitted by the gods. So what we see at the beginning of this excerpt is Orestes' acquittal, right? So it's essentially, it's a tie vote in the jury, and the goddess Athena casts the tie-breaking vote for him. So it's kind of like what our Senate situation is right now. You got 50-50, and then the vice president casts tie-breaking votes, right? So the remainder of the excerpt then concerns how these goddesses, the Eumenides or the Furies, are going to be appeased having been robbed of their prey, right? So we talked a little bit about this last time. Does anybody remember who or what the Furies were? One of you said you remembered something about this from the Percy Jackson books or something.
So they kind of like bats a little bit, like their wings, how they were like structured.
Yeah, like the way they're physically described actually kind of varies from story to story, right? So like if we look on page 112 at this vase painting, which illustrates the scene of Orestes' acquittal in the play, the Furies are over here on the left. Two of them are asleep, one of them is just waking up. They're being awakened by the ghost of Orestes' mother, right, who wants them to wake up and go and avenge her, right? Do we see anything obviously monstrous about them? Yeah, they just kind of look like normal sleeping women, right? And then yet at other times, they're depicted as looking something like this. So what's going to pop up here is another Greek vase painting, which illustrates Orestes being chased by the Furies. whenever the hell this is ready. So as this starts coming into focus, we can see that the Furies on either side of Orestes here, right? They're covered with snakes. Right? He's holding a dagger to try to fend them off, but they're goddesses, so that does no good. And one of them is also holding a mirror. Right? The idea being to hold the mirror into the face of the criminal to force him to reflect on his crime and the nature of it, right? So the Furies, or the Eumenides, Eumenides, whatever you want to call them, are an example of what are called, oh, damn it. Chthonic deities. Chthonic simply means that they live in the earth. And at least in the Greek context, these chthonic deities are usually represented as being older than the gods of Olympus, right? Zeus and his brothers and sisters and children, right? These are deities that are born of natural forces, or that are closely related to natural forces. Like, the Eumenides describe themselves in the play as the daughters of night, right? Now, on the other hand, the Olympian deities even those who do have something to do with the earth are sky gods, right? They live on top of a mountain. And occasionally, let's say, come down to render judgment upon mortals or participate in battles or things like that, right? But they are of a different order of beings than these older chthonic deities, right? You've got these creatures that live in the earth, and then these gods that live in the sky. And the way you were supposed to reach each of them was different as well. So if you wanted to make a sacrifice to chthonic deities, what you did was put things in the earth, right? You buried them, or the second play in the series is called the Libation Bearers, because at funerals, what the ancient Greeks would do was mix honey with wine and pour it out onto the ground to appease the spirit of the dead person. So any sacrifice you're putting into the ground is regarded as a chthonic sacrifice. If you want to reach the gods in the sky, typically what you do is put something on an altar and burn it, right? We can see the logic of this, right? If something's in the sky, you send smoke up. Something's in the ground, you put something in the ground to reach them. So Athena and the Eumenides they're both gods, but they're different kinds of gods from different unrelated generations. So what I'd like to look at here is the first speech that the chorus here makes. The chorus is the Eumenides themselves. Can I get somebody to read that for us on page 113, bottom of the page, after Apollo and Orestes leave? Yeah, go ahead.
You younger gods, you wrenched our ancient laws out of my grasp and stamped them under foot. You heap on us dishonorable content. Now my anger turns against this land. I'll spread my poisons, how it's going to pay when I release this venom in my heart to ease my grief. I'll saturate this ground, it won't survive, from it disease will grow. Infecting women and children, that's justice.
sterility
sterility will spread across the land, contaminate the soil, destroy mankind. What can I do now but scream out in pain? The citizens make fun of us, the Furies. How can we put up with such indignity, daughters of night, disgracefully abused, dishonor and shame, our power is cast aside.
Okay, so what is their basic complaint here? What are they angry about? What does it mean for, pardon?
The laws, that they're not following the laws. Because they say there's like stamped everywhere or something like that.
Yeah, that, this guy is a matricide, right? He killed his mother. What the ancient laws say is that the Furies then get to pursue him and drive him mad, right? That they get to punish him. And this jury trial, where people got to vote on whether this guy is guilty or not, right? This to them is a violation of ancient tradition. This is a violation of what the laws have traditionally been. And as such, as the embodiments of that old law, right, it shows disrespect for them. So what are some of the key words we might pull out of here that we might sort of like form into patterns here that might be important? Okay, poison and venom, right? Those are two words that are related to each other, right? And what do they threaten to poison? What does this suggest? What does their threat at the end of this suggest about what sorts of things they have power over?
It shows that they like living on the earth.
Yeah, these are earth deities, right? The kinds of things they can poison, the kinds of things they can destroy, that they can damage, are things of the earth, right? They can poison the land, they can poison the people, right? So what they can do is ruin the fertility of the land, right? And for them, right, that's justice. So one thing that we might want to think about here as we examine this is exactly how this play conceptualizes the idea of justice, right? So what does justice seem to mean for the Furies?
Being able to make him like go crazy, and that's what their job is. So like, if someone does something wrong, they punish them.
Yeah, punishment, right? Justice means punish the guilty, right? Do specific circumstances seem to matter very much to them? Yeah, mitigating circumstances don't matter, right? The fact of the matter is Orestes killed his mother, and therefore they're supposed to hound him to the ends of the earth. And anyone who is stopping them from doing that is disrespecting them and treating them with contempt. I think it's also important here that they mention ancient laws. Right, drawing attention to the fact that we're dealing here with gods of different generations. That Athena is a much younger deity than the Furies are, right? They're older powers. You younger gods, you've wrenched our ancient laws out of my grasp and stamped them underfoot. You heap on us dishonorable contempt. The citizens make fun of us, the Furies. How can we put up with such indignity, daughters of night, disgracefully abused, dishonored, shamed, our powers cast aside? So, on the surface, what they're mad about is having to let Orestes go, right? What does it sound like they might really be mad about?
I get made fun of and no one takes them seriously.
Yeah, it's really the lack of respect that makes them angry, right? That these citizens, right, this body of citizens is so unafraid of us that they voted to acquit this mother killer rather than letting us do our work. So yeah, so a lot of what's going on here is less about the specifics of this case and more about respect for age and for tradition, right? And then Athena responds. And since Elizabeth read the chorus portion, Ron, can you read Athena here on page 114?
Let me persuade you not to start this trial. You have not been beaten. The votes were fair, the numbers equal, no disgrace to you. But we received clear evidence from Zeus, the one who spoke the oracle, the player,
Orestes.
Orestes should not suffer for his act. So don't be vengeful, breathing anger on this land and drenching it with showers, whose drops like spears will fill the seas and blast it fruitfulness.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you, in all righteousness, you will have your place a
Subterranean. Mm-hmm.
cavern, yours by beside their heart. You'll sit on glittering thrones, worship with reverence by yourself.
Okay, so what's the offer that Athena is here making to them to get their cooperation? Okay, how specifically?
Being worshipped by the citizens.
Yeah, being worshipped by the citizens, right? You will still be worshipped by the citizens. And where will they be worshipped? Yeah, we're going to give you a cave, right? But, remember, these are earth deities, right? A subterranean cavern, an underground cave, that's the kind of thing they like. That's the kind of place where they would be worshipped anyway, right? So, she offers them their own little cave with glittering thrones where they'll be worshipped with reverence by the citizens, right? So, on the one hand, right, she does seem to be making them an offer of continued reverence and relevance, right? But it does also seem to be one that puts them in a particular place, right? There's a place for you in this new city, but you can't simply have the run of it, right? You get to live in this neat little cavern and sit on glittering thrones there, but you can't just go running around spitting poison on people. Now, what does she try to persuade them about the fairness of the trial? Well, I think both of those things are important, right? Like, on the one hand, right, this was a fair vote. And remember that at the time this play is written, Athens is a democracy, right? So all matters of civic importance are decided by vote. And the clear evidence from Zeus, I think, is also important. Who's Zeus?
It's like, the big dog, he's in charge. I don't know if I explained, like, I know, like, the sport beside me and what Hades gets, like, I know, like, he can, like, kind of control the weather, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So if the Olympians are overall sky gods, right? Zeus is specifically the sky god, right? He controls the weather, he wields the mighty lightning bolt, things like that, right? So he's the king of the gods, and he is the chief sky god. So we're seeing here developing a sky versus earth binary, right? Where these younger sky gods want one thing and these older earth gods want something else. And I think it's related then to a youth versus age binary as well. And do the Furies go for it? Are they willing to accept this offer that Athena makes to them? Yeah, the fact that they repeat the previous speech says that they are unmoved, right? Their position remains the same. And what's going on? Like the reason why they repeat themselves twice has to do with the structure of ancient Greek plays. So, have either of you read an ancient Greek play before? Like, have you read like Oedipus the King or Antigone or anything like that in high school? No? Okay. So this is completely new stuff to you. All right. So then, why don't we detour slightly for a minute, and I'll tell you a little bit about that particular context, and then we'll come back to the play. Okay. So. Ancient Greek plays have their origin in religious rituals. Now, you who have read the Percy Jackson books, I don't know if this particular character is involved in them, but this particular god, vine leaves, wine cup, confused expression. Do you know who this is? Not an H. Starts with a D. He might not be part of the whole Percy Jackson thing. He's not really a god who's appropriate for children. So this is Dionysus. Dionysus, so if the name rings a bell, does anybody know what Dionysus is the god of? What's that? Those aren't hearts. Those are grapevine leaves.
Wine.
Yes. The leaves, the slightly confused expression in the wine cup. He's the god of wine. And with things that are associated with wine. So, he is the god of wine. He is also the god of chaos, frenzy, and intense emotions. in addition to dance, and for reasons we'll get to in a minute, he's also kind of god of foreignness. And the reason he's a god of foreignness is that the ancient Greeks, as we can probably tell from our reading of Plato and Aristotle, liked order. They liked logic. They liked thinking of human beings as reasonable. And Dionysus is kind of the opposite of all of that. So he's a god that's never really, he is apparently of Greek origin. He wasn't imported from some other mythology or something like that. But he doesn't quite fit into the Greek system. And in fact, his shrines were usually kept outside the city for most of the year because you didn't want that shit in your city. But once a year, in Athens, there was a festival called the City Dionysia, which was a celebration of Dionysus. In part because acting all logical and Spock-like all year gets exhausting, right? So you have, a couple of days out of the year when everybody just lets their hair down and does what the hell they want. So, think of it like being kind of like the purge, but without the crime, right? What's that?
I was just thinking that. Just like the party.
Yeah, but not people beating each other up in the streets.
Yeah.
So they would take the god's image from the shrine, bring it into the city, parade it around. People would get roaring crazy drunk, and they would also hold a competition in which playwrights put on plays, right? Now, this sounds a little bit out of place with the rest of the festival, right? But there was actually a logic to this. So, the basic purpose, according to Aristotle, of a Greek tragedy is to induce what he calls catharsis. And catharsis actually means purging. So the idea is, right, the whole community gets together and watches these plays that induce intense emotional states. And when the process is over, everybody has purged all that nasty stuff, right? And you can go back to being logical and reasonable and dull for the rest of the year, right? So the whole idea is a kind of communal purging of negative emotions. Now, tragedies also typically involve either the purging of an undesirable person from the community, or sometimes, as in this case, reconciliation of opposing persons or principles. Now, when we think of the word tragedy, what do we usually associate tragedy with?
Something bad happened, something sad.
Yeah, we usually, if we say something is, oh, that's a tragedy, right?
Yeah.
We mean it's, it's something both kind of sad and unexpected, right? This is not what the Greeks meant by tragedy. When they talked about a tragedy, they were talking about a play with specific features. And it didn't have to be a sad play, and it didn't have to be one that ended unhappily. In order for a play to qualify as a tragedy, right, first, you took into account the characters. The characters in a tragedy were heroes, gods, or nobles. So high status characters, right? Characters who are in some way spiritually, morally, or socially superior to the audience, right? In terms of its plot, it had to include a reversal of fortune. Now, when we think of a tragedy, we think of that reversal of fortune being from good to bad. But the ancient Greeks thought this could go either way in a tragedy, right? So it could be, and usually was, good to bad, but could also be from bad to good. So in this particular play, for example, Orestes starts out in a pretty bad place, being hounded by the Furies, but is exonerated through the trial, and his fortune goes from bad to good. So this is that slightly rarer type of tragedy with a happy ending. So at this festival, playwrights would put on usually sets of 3 plays, which were usually not related to each other in terms of plot. Aeschylus is unusual in that he wrote like coherent trilogies. They were also capped off by what's called a satyr play, which was usually a really, really dirty comic version of one of the serious plays. And the winner was awarded a goat, which, doesn't sound like much to us, but in 5th century Athens, a goat was worth a lot of money. So it was actually a pretty big and serious prize. So this is what a Greek theater looked like. Basically, the audience sat on these bleachers, which are called the theatron, which we can recognize as the origin of our word theater. Most of the action took place down here in this this pit at the bottom, which is referred to as the orchestra or dancing pit. Back here, you had a permanent backdrop called the scena, and the actors could go back into these doors to change costumes. Because one of the things about Greek plays is they were actually, like, even if there were more than 3 characters, they're only written for 3 actors plus a chorus. So most of the actors would be playing multiple parts. Right? You will never see more than 3 characters on stage at the same time in a Greek play. Again, with the exception of the chorus. Now the chorus is probably the part that seems a little bit weird, like probably the weirdest part of all of this to us. So the chorus in a tragedy was made up of a dozen singers and dancers. And usually in a Greek play, the chorus represents the position of ordinary people. So this play is actually kind of unusual in the chorus is made up of goddesses. And this whole thing where the chorus repeats itself multiple times is normal in a Greek play. Right? The chorus performed what were called odes, which are these songs with 3 parts. The strophe, the antistrophe, and the epode. And I don't know why I'm writing this on a slant. So, all these terms refer to is the direction in which the chorus danced while they were reciting this particular part. So, when they were reciting the strophe, they went left to right. The antistrophe, they went right to left. And the epode, which was supposed to represent unity and coming back together, they stood still. So this is a very, very long, roundabout way of answering your initial comments about the chorus repeating itself, with a whole bunch of details about what Greek drama is and where it comes from. So to get back to our basic discussion of this here, yeah, so what we've got here is, again, like they're complaining about the younger gods not respecting their position and their laws, right? What does giving us a cave have to do with respecting the ancient laws, right? And then if we look at Athena's response, Ron, can you read that for us? But you've not lost honor, your goddesses.
But you not lost honor, your goddesses. Don't let your anger lead to you to excess, to blast this land of man past remedy. I have faith in Zeus. Why must I mention that? Well, I'm the only god who knows the keys to Zeus' arsenal, where he keeps still his lightning bolt. But there's no need for that, except my argument. Don't let rash tongues hurl threats against this man, condemning it to sterile fruitlessness. Ease your anger, let your furies black and better ways receive.
Mm-hmm.
You can live with me, deceitful honors, the first fruits of this fertile land are yours. Wherever are those offering for heirs, for marriage, from now on they're yours. With all this, you'll praise what I'm advising.
Okay, so how does Athena's response to the Furies begin here? What does she remind them of first?
The goddesses.
Yeah, your goddesses. You've not lost honor, right? Don't let your anger lead you to excess. And then what does she remind them of?
That she can basically get Zeus's lightning bolt.
Yeah. I know where Zeus keeps his lightning bolts. And Zeus is more powerful than you are. She's already made the point that Zeus is more powerful than them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, okay, if you want to blast this land in this new city, right? Then Zeus can blast you. But there's no need for that yet. Right? So she threatens them with violence. Backs off from that, and then what does she offer them?
That they can live with her and receive full honor.
And what more specifically will they receive if they stay with her?
Fertile women, like children and marriage.
Yeah, they'll get sacrificial offerings, right, from the people if they stay here with her, right? So she's offered them a shrine. She's offered them sacrifices. And these sacrifices relate to exactly the things that the Furies are threatening, right? If you don't blast our fertile lands, we'll give you the fruits of these fertile lands, right? We will even, we will show respect to you and make offerings to you when the people affirm their fertility through marriage and through having children, right? So, yeah, all of these are related in some way to fertility functions. And then, Can you read the next bit for us there, Elizabeth?
Such suffering for me, my ancient wisdom driven underground. Despise, dishonor, the shame, my shame. This pure rage I breathe consumes me utterly. What sinks under my ribs and pains my heart. O night, my mother, the cunning of those gods, too hard to overcome. Take all my ancient powers and leave me nothing.
Okay, so how is their complaints changed? It's not quite the same complaint it was in the previous two passages, right? So we've moved here from the strophe to the antistrophe part of the chorus.
They're filled with rage and
Mm-hmm.
pain.
Yeah, they are filled with rage and pain. Are they still threatening to do anything about it?
I mean, yes and no. They don't say it, but you can kind of tell they're still thinking.
Yeah, like the bits about saturating the lands with poison, it dropped out, right? So they're no longer talking about making the land suffer. They're focused now inward, right? On such suffering for me. They move from making everyone else suffer to their own suffering. My ancient wisdom driven underground. Right, again, right, you just want to put us in a little cave and give us some presents and not let us have the run of the place like we're used to having. The shame, my shame, this pure rage I breathe consumes me utterly. O night, my mother, the cunning of those gods, too hard to overcome, takes all my ancient powers and leaves me nothing. What does this word cunning suggest? Why would they complain about the cunning of these gods? What does it mean if someone is cunning? What sort of animal do we associate with the word cunning? Not necessarily a tiger. A tiger doesn't really need to be cunning, right? Because it's big and strong. The animal that's often associated with the word cunning is the fox. So what characteristics do we associate with a fox? Yeah, they're clever in a sneaky kind of way, right? Yeah, so someone who is cunning is both clever and sneaky, but clever in a way that's kind of underhanded, right? Like, wicked, tricksy, false hobbitses. So the fact that they're accusing Athena and the Olympian gods of being cunning suggests that they think what has happened. Yeah, that we've been tricked out of our due, right? These young gods have fooled us and are showing us no respect. So let's skip ahead a little bit. Well, actually, no. Let's page 116. The next passage spoken by Athena. Ron, if you could just starting with, "I'll bear with your rage."
I'll bear with your rage, for you are older, and thus your wisdom far exceeds my own. But Zeus gave me broad intelligence as well. So let me tell you this, if you leave it. For this land you'll feel a lover's yearning. As time goes on, my citizens will win increasing honor, and you, on your throne seated outside the house of
Erechtheus. Mm-hmm.
A place of honor will win respect from lines of men and women. Violence past and youth defiant, and all the world beyond. So cast no stones for bloodshed on this land, my reign. Do not corrupt our youthful hearts and intoxicating them with rage like wine. Or rip the heart of our fighting cock to set it in my people, giving them a thirst for reckless intermixing war. Let them fight wars abroad without restraint, and those men driven by lust for fame. I want no birds who fight their wars at home. That's what I offer you. It's yours to take. Do good things, receive good things in honor. Take your place in the land the gods all love.
So what's the first thing Athena emphasizes here in this speech? I'll bear with your rage, for you are older, and thus your wisdom far exceeds my own.
She's like acknowledging their splendor.
Yeah, or at the very least, she's trying to flatter them, right?
Mm-hmm.
With respectful language, and certainly acknowledging their superior age, right? And this comes into play, right, when she talks about not wanting these older gods to corrupt our youthful hearts. So there's a notion here, like there's an association of being older with also being kind of jaded, right? And these older ideas represented by the Furies as being violent, right? Don't make my people violent, right? Don't make them fight amongst themselves. Whereas youth is here associated with innocence and achievement. Right? This new young city of mine, provided you stick around and play along and play by the rules, will achieve great things, right? There's potential here. But not if you are inciting the people to try to tear themselves apart. And then we get the same again, right? They speak the antistrophe again. So still not convinced, still mad. And then let's just take this through to the end here. Athena, I'll never tire of telling you your gifts. Top of page 117. I'll not tire of telling you your gifts. Okay.
I will not tire of telling you for your gifts, so you can never lodge complaints that I, a newer god or a man who guards this land, fail to
Revere.
such ancient godness and cast you out of exile from our city. No. But if you respect persuasion, holding it reverence, that sacred power whose soothing spell sits on my tongue, then you should stay. If that's not your wish, it would be unjust to vent your anger on this city, enduring its people, enrage at them from spite. It's up to you. Take your allotted portion of this land, justly entitled to your share of honor.
Okay, so allotted portion and share, just to pause here for a second, right? What she's saying is that you can have part of this land if you're willing to play along. You just can't have all of it. And if we continue with the chorus leader, Queen Athena, this place you say is ours.
Queen Athena, this place you say is ours. What exactly is it?
One free of pain, without anxieties, why not accept?
If I do, what on earth would I do?
Without you, no house can thrive.
You do this, you grant me that much power.
I will, together will enrich the lives of all who worship us.
This promise you make, you'll hold to it forever.
Yes, I won't say anything I don't fulfill.
Your magic's doing its work, it seems. I feel my rage diminish.
Then stay in this land, you'll win more friends.
Let me speak out a blessing in the land. Tell me what I might say.
Speak nothing of brutal victory, only blessing stemming from the earth, the ocean's depths, and heavens. Let gusting winds carry the lands in glorious sunlight. Our herds and harvest overflow with plain, so they never fail. Our citizens in time to come, you see, will last forever. Let their prosperity match how well they worship you. I love these righteous men the way a gardener loves his grown plants. This race now free of grief. These things are yours to give. For my part, I'll see the city win its triumph, fame in deadly wars where men seek glory. So all men celebrate victorious Athens.
Then we'll accept this home and live here with Athena. We'll never harm a place which she and Ares and all powerful Zeus hold as a fortress of the gods. This glorious altar, this shield for all the gods of Greece. I make this prayer for Athens, prophesying fine things for her. Bounteous, happy harvest bursting from the earth beneath the radiant sun.
So exactly the opposite of what they were promising when they felt they weren't getting their way, right? So what's changed here? What does Athena offer them that they are willing to accept? What makes them move from being destroyers of fertility to being guarantors of fertility?
Don't they promise them to give a lot of portion of this land?
That's where the change begins, right? Take your allotted portion, right? Take out, you can have part of this, but not all of it, right? And then more specifically, when she asks what honors they get, what does she tell them?
She said no house can thrive without them.
No house can thrive without you, yeah. So this refers to, on the one hand, their function as justice goddesses, right? Punishers of the guilty, but also to the fact that they're earth goddesses, right? That they live underground. They can shake the foundations of the earth if they want to, right? They can make any house unstable. Or they can choose to make a home prosper, if they'll be peaceful. So there are a couple of directions we can take this now, right? If we want to think about sort of implied themes that we can pull out. Like, what implied themes beyond the obvious have you guys noticed we talked about today? Like, what binaries or patterns have we looked at a lot?
Rage and peace.
What's that?
They were like had a lot of rage in them at the beginning, and now they're kind of like peaceful.
Okay. Seems about justice is really about peace. Along the same lines, we could also say that it could also be about compromise, right? And what about the forces that are being asked to compromise with each other? Like, what different pairs of opposites have we pulled out of this?
Like Athena is a sky god and they're earth goddesses.
Yeah, sky and earth, right? Could really be about that, conflict, resolving the conflict between sky gods and earth gods. It could also be about generational conflict, right? Right, the fact that the Olympians are younger gods with different values from the Furies, who are older and, shall we say, more traditional in their thinking. Okay, so we're about out of time here. Do either of you have any questions about this? Okay, so get to work thinking about those exploratory reflections. Remember to do letter from Birmingham jail for next time, and that the vocab words for the Eumenides are due tonight, right? All right. We'll get you your cleanup rags, and you may go.